Hey, Merry Christmas, Gospel Rant watchers and watchers of DrBillSenyard YouTube station. Merry Christmas. And thanks for spending a few minutes with me. I know things are busy around Christmas, but I'm going to try to make it worth your time. I have preached almost 30 times, over 30 times on the Luke and Matthew Advent passages. I mean, the hardest thing when a pastor is looking at this text is that it's been covered so many times. Familiarity is just sky high, and so audiences' brains just turn off. You know what I mean? No judgment. I get that. I do that too. So stick with me, and I think you'll agree at the end that this will be different. Provocative, entertaining, very biblical, and I think you'll see the season differently. I hope it's life-changing, a source of great aha. We all need that, right? And let me know, push back. You can agree, you can criticize at bill@gospel-app.com, or if you're on the YouTube channel, just add a comment. I love that, right? So thanks ahead of time. Well, here's an oldie goldie, Max Lucado from his book, God Came Near. Quote, "He looks like anything but a king. His face is prunish and red. His cry, though strong and healthy, is still the helpless and piercing cry of a baby. And he is absolutely dependent upon Mary for his well-being. Majesty in the midst of the mundane. Holiness in the filth of sheep manure and sweat. Divinity entering the world on the floor of a stable, through the womb of a teenager and in the presence of a carpenter. She touches the face of the infant God." Max Lucado, God Came Near. I love that quote. The birth scene is fabulous narrative. I mean, I'm an author now, so I'm telling you, I'm an award-winning author now. Yeah, it's true. This is great storytelling. It's a constructed tableau, as well a tableau that you will find anywhere in Hollywood. It's got irony, it's got sarcasm, it's got metaphor. It's just loaded. Everywhere you turn, there are messages from God, some right on the surface, and others far more subtle and deep. And here it is. God's communicating with his fractured image bearer, that's us, the highly defensive and skittish and prone to self-criticism humanity. So sometimes we look to the words that are printed to see what God specifically said, like in his conversation with Mary. Other times, like this one, we're going to look at what was not said. And we can look at who is in certain scenes, for instance, the manger scene. Right? In this talk, we're going to start with who was not at the manger scene, who could have been, and honestly should have been. All right? And I'm going to start with the so-called, unmentioned, by the way, innkeeper. So let me set the scene, first century Judea. First, we need to shake this modern notion of inns. This didn't look anything like a Marriott or a Motel 6. There were no suites, no free breakfast, no health clubs, free breakfast with that, I don't know what substance they use for those eggs. It's not eggs, right? No, this is the cataluma, a common place of lodging for travelers on the roads. So technically, it's just a family home with a room. From what we know of the geography, the geology, it was likely just a cave dug into the hillside, owned by a Jewish family, definitely a small family-run business. The main door may have been street level, but probably then stepped down. And as you go into the main room, there would be a moderate-sized living room, maybe 20 by 12. At one end would have been a modest kitchen with food and storage hanging from shelves on ropes. The stove would be a small kiln-looking device. The walls may be 12 feet high. The windows would have a slit because you don't want to lose much heat, but you got to let the cooking smoke out, right? So you need some ventilation. On one side of the main entry room would be a stone or wooden slab. This would be the bed for the proprietor and his spouse, and probably their children would sleep on the floor around the base of the bed. And then further back would be another step down into a cavernous space, and if it was large, maybe 2 or 3, where animals were kept, normally to protect them from the cold, wild animals, or other harm. The hard limestone ground would be covered with hay, and that's it. The sheep and goats, they also served as a source of heat. The ancient furnace system, a noticeable aroma in the rest of the cave. But anyone who's had teens, particularly boys, you know what that aroma is about. Now, to say that the inn was full meant that none of the guests, including the inn owner and his spouse, was willing to sacrifice their space for a woman in pained labor. All right, here we go. Here's the first metaphor. Irony. This is a metaphor for the world that Jesus entered. The creation he loved and came to rescue, man, there was just zero appreciation or sensitivity. No one was willing to sacrifice their spot of comfort for a pregnant lady. No one wanted to give up the room for their deity, if you will. Okay, that's a bit unfair because they didn't know. I get it, but it's the power of metaphor, right? Everybody was doing their own thing. That's fallen humanity then and now. Everybody solidly justified their own needs over the needs of the poor woman in painful labor. No judgment, that's why Jesus came. Not to judge, but to rescue those people, those unlikely, unworthy people. That's me. He didn't just come just to teach how people should do differently. He came to rescue the unrescuable, to love the selfish. That's what he does. So there was not a single righteous soul in the picture, right? The essence of righteousness is other orientation, selflessness. I guess I would argue maybe Mary and Joseph, but taking them off the table, nobody else on the scene. The motivation of selflessness was to put the needs of others over yourself, right? To love God and love your neighbor. The absence of which we saw in this particular montage is the core of all sin. A righteous man or woman would have been willing to give up their cloak, their substance for the needy, for the weak, for the alien in the community, for Mary. So the story is a living, metaphorical parable, a stage play, and parable to the Good Samaritan, right? Nobody came to the aid of Mary, and no one sacrificed for the Godchild. No one. It's just raw, embarrassing indifference, real unrighteousness. No room? For God so loved the world that it put up a no vacancy sign and pointed it to God. Truth told, there was plenty of room, but it would have cost someone their comfort that evening, right? Nada. No one was willing to give up their hard-earned bed. And can you imagine the difference in the story if the innkeeper was willing to give up his bed? He would be having churches named after him, but he didn't. He was a shill for all of humanity. This was a pregnant woman in labor, impregnated with the yet hidden God of all creation, and she was badly mistreated per any and all hospitality rules in the Jewish culture. She was overlooked. She was treated with disinterest and dishonor. That's exactly what Jesus will experience and more. And that's why he came to rescue and who he came to rescue. It's a parable in and of itself. From creation post-fall, the face of God has been hidden, obscured, withheld, guarded from the eyes of his image bearers. And nevertheless, though God is hidden from immediate sight, humanity continued to deteriorate into more and more self-focus, so unlike God, who is inherently other-focused. And here it's played out. The hidden womb-enclosed deity entered Bethlehem and wasn't worshipped. Matter of fact, just was treated like garbage. There was no room found for God in the world, on the highway, in the inn. God's response? Well, I think I could justify anger or wrath or lightning bolts, but no, this is why God came. And he came in such a vulnerable way. He has come to rescue these thoughtless, indifferent, self-focused creatures. That's all of us who time and time again turn away from sacrificing for him. Now, to be clear, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm wondering, I think, maybe, I hope, he innately loved this so-called innkeeper, who, by the way, is shameful, not worthy of honor. But in the heart of God, he wouldn't necessarily be dismissed, rejected, or dishonored. God would treat him way differently than he treated God. And I'm hoping that he was going to be rescued, not because he earned it, neither did I, because there's no one righteous, no, not one. Dr. Luke presents the scene in starkness. There was no room for God in the Jewish inn, on the Jewish way. Like the angels who visited Lot and Sodom, like Jesus' entry into the temple of God 30 years later, there was truly no heart for God, no openness, no room for God, no heart of God that honored others over self. Little anyway, there was some, but not a lot. Though God innately loves the unlovable, the unloved, and the unlovely, he didn't find that on planet Earth, at least not in Bethlehem. But again, that's why he came, not to judge, but to rescue failed image bearers. Those were serial withholders of space for God in their lives. Indifference, busyness, self-focus, and that's still the case today. Honestly, no judgment. Busyness isn't bad necessarily, but when it becomes the end, the fruit of the season, it sucks the life out of the message. Was Bethlehem too busy to hear the good news with all the traditions and rituals and church? But God's voice has been very, very consistent. I desire mercy. And here they are in the house of bread, Bethlehem, and they're too busy to show mercy to a young woman, a needy woman in great pain, one of their own. This is tragic indifference. There can be no surprise that people like you and I, and like them, who move in this indifference, we miss God. Here's Lucado again. Meanwhile, the city hums. The merchants are unaware that God has visited their planet. The innkeeper would never believe that he had just sent God into the cold, and the people would scoff at anyone who told them the Messiah lay in the arms of a teenager on the outskirts of their village. They were all too busy to consider the possibility. Those who missed His Majesty's arrival that night missed it not because they simply weren't looking. Little has changed in the last 2,000 years, has it? Close quote. Interesting. I find this fascinating. You can pass this on at a Christmas party. Bethlehem is at a root of another word we use today. In the 1500s, the portico of the London monastery named St. Mary of Bethlehem had become used as a hospital. In fact, a city-run insane asylum. For a small admission price, people could go and view and heckle the inmates. In time, the word Bedlam, a corruption of Bethlehem, came to refer to the noise and confusion that symbolized the insane asylum. Right? You say coincidence? Perhaps. I say God's sense of humor at Advent. That's what He entered into, post-fall Bedlam. So in one sense, this is a fabulous picture in Bethlehem. God born into the midst of insanity. Insanity is the natural result of the people ripped from their roots, their identities, crushed by fear, loneliness, shame, guilt, failure, paranoia, leading to implicit or explicit rebellion. So into that setting, God birthed sanity incarnate. Jesus, right? Man in communion, perfect relationship with God, perfect God and perfect man together, peace born in Bedlam. This season, are we too busy, too indifferent, too insane to see God? Well, that's the innkeeper. How about Herod? He missed the birth of the God-child too. In his interior, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual bedlam, he missed one of the greatest opportunities ever given to humanity and any human king. He could have been the first king to bow down to the child king who was king over all. That would have been amazing glory and legacy. Ignored, a lost moment. I don't think that it was a coincidence that the wise men went to him first. I see it as an invitation by God for this crazed, paranoid royal to finally let go of all of the things that would eventually drive him to a very painful and tragic death. It's great storytelling. From God's perspective, he wasn't the rightful Jewish king anyway. He was a mere usurper to the Judean throne. He wasn't a Jew. He wasn't a descendant of David. He wasn't even from the tribe of Judah. He came to the throne by murdering anybody and everybody who had a claim to it, including his brother-in-law, one of the high priests, his sister, two of his own children. He had one of the leading citizens of Jerusalem killed immediately to coincide with his death, so that at least there would be cries of mourning. Wow. More cosmic humor? He wasn't even the king of Judah. He thought he was, and in some ways was on the throne, but he actually served the Roman emperor. So, for reasons of his own, God gave this most unlikely choice the opportunity to bow to me, fake king, serve me, and I can rescue you. You will finally be my adopted son. Matter of fact, you'll finally become the king of the Jews for real. All right. It was more subtle than that, don't get me wrong, but we have the benefit of hindsight. But wouldn't that be just like God? It's the fleshing out of what the psalmist says in Psalm 2. Quote, "Therefore, you kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you be destroyed in your way. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." See the opportunity. Psalm 2, 10 to 12. God offered Herod that. blessedness, the same thing he offered Abraham in Genesis 12. But Herod, the crazed, maniacal, paranoid, self-focused ruler, authority, who represents all of us in some way in our bedlam. All right, let's be honest. From our point of view, the Jesus child presents a massive threat to us, our personal authority, or our free choice. He would be served. He would have us bow and submit, not just once. He's going to ask us to accept a gift of honor and glory that is solely heaven-born. Nothing we earned. We hate that. We humans hate submission and not earning, being given what we haven't earned. All that's four-letter words. Herod is us. We're him. And he would prefer status quo, same. And the infant appeared to be a threat to his power and position and status, and so had to be removed. The same thing's going to happen in 30 years to that very same child from authority figures. Yeah? And this is one of the glorious ironies of the montage. Who had the rightful claim to the throne? Well, according to the biblical account, the rightful line of David went through an unknown peasant girl from the Galilee region, Mary, and her son. And the innkeeper and Herod had an opportunity to submit. It's an amazing narrative. How about the religious leaders? The priests also missed the birth of the Christ child. And ironically, the very people who had dedicated their lives to worshiping and honoring God, that's what they said, that's what they did theoretically, the ones who claimed to listen heavenward, they completely overlooked him, God, when God actually had needs. I mean, humanly speaking. Technically, they served every need of the presence of God in the temple, though we know that the Holy of Holies was empty. They were serving an empty shell. But when the actual presence of God appeared, not that far away, they couldn't be torn away from singing to an empty space. See, irony? Tragedy? In Matthew 2, we're told they even knew the prophecy. They could quote chapter and verse, at least the scribes. Bethlehem was the place where the Messiah would come. And add to that the shepherds running all over town talking about angels and a newborn king in Bethlehem. What must the religious leaders have been thinking? Well, here it is. The supposed servants of God, the professionals, the priests, the ones entrusted with discerning the movements in heaven, missed God's greatest miracle. And come on, far too often the same thing happens today. We professional Christians get tangled up in ritual and tradition and rules and interpretations, presuppositions, issues, debates, distractions. In the noise of all of our religious machinery, we miss Jesus, the present child. We stand before empty spaces far too often and ignore the Spirit in us. So listen to the holy gag. Instead of priests, the shepherds show up, and they receive a personal invitation from God himself. And what a scene they made. These men and women became unlikely heralds going door to door, I imagine, proclaiming that the Messiah had come. The good news of God's kingdom arrived on the wind through a ragged, socially dismissed, culturally ridiculous crew. It would have made anyone laugh. I mean, picture the modern equivalents. Hell's Angels or skinheads or drug addicts or pimps going door to door inviting families to church to meet Jesus. Right? It's comical. Shepherds were not admired in that time and place. Their vocation ranked with tanning and tax collecting and other despised, unclean trades. They had a reputation for theft. Lost sheep often reappeared suspiciously as lamb chops in the butcher shops. The law even prohibited buying from them. They were outcast, unwelcome in the temple. So how fitting then, and how astonishing, that they were also invited to come into the presence of the child God. Lipnei Elohim, the Hebrew for right in front of his face, to see the face of God, something that humans weren't supposed to be able to do before. I'm going to say more next time about that. They were personally invited to come and worship the Holy One face to face with the child. Do you see it? They were barred from the empty temple, but welcomed into the immediate presence of God in the cavern, in the cave. Pure divine irony. Here's one more thing. We still cling to the idea that God can't be touched by the unclean. The deeper problem is the assumption that some of us are clean. But in Christ, the unclean, the broken, the forgotten, the failures, the refuse of the world touch God and God touches them. And when the unclean touch God, God doesn't become unclean. We become clean. Doesn't something feel wrong with that picture? Or does it? This is exactly the kind of scandal God loves to orchestrate. Those who should have shepherded God's people refuse to come. So God sent actual shepherds, unclean, dismissed, cultural lepers, those who were refused into the temple to do the job instead. It's a divine slap in the face to the religious powers. And lastly, the Jews of Bethlehem and Jerusalem didn't come. I mean, even the people, those that Jesus had come to give the good news to, couldn't break away from one of the low points in their lives. What do I mean? Bethlehem was filled with humiliated Jews. Returning to your homeland was of prophetic import to the people. So every 50 years, they were to have returned to the place of their forefathers to celebrate God's provision and faithfulness, a jubilee. But now, they have to return shamefully ordered by their Gentile occupiers, their oppressors, in order to be cataloged like animals so that taxes could be properly exacted. This was a time of massive humiliation for the Jews. Just one more slap in the face for a once proud people. Another reminder that God had disciplined them for their sins and the sins of their fathers. So this wasn't a time of rejoicing, hardly. This was the time that the people really needed God as rescuer, a present God, God before them. They were at a corporate low, like the religious leaders. They were told of the coming, but there's no record of a visit to the stable. Well, what kept them away? I don't know, disbelief, doubt, cynicism, denial, repression, busyness, fear, shame, humiliation, all insanity, really. It's bedlam. Their hope in mind was born that day in a manger, the light of the world, the light that broke into the land of the shadow of death. For unto us a child is born, right? Isaiah 9. But tragically, they would not come. Here's Brennan Manning, quote, "The Bethlehem mystery will ever be a scandal to aspiring disciples who see a triumphant Savior and a prosperity gospel. The infant Jesus was born in unimpressive circumstances. No one can say exactly where. His parents were of no social significance whatsoever, and his chosen welcoming committee were all turkeys, losers, and dirt-poor shepherds. But in this weakness and poverty, the shipwrecked at the stable would come to know the love of God. The shipwrecked at the stable are the poor in spirit who feel lost in the cosmos, adrift in an open sea, clinging with a life and death grip to one solitary plank. Finally, they are washed ashore and make their way to the stable, stripped of the old spirit of possessiveness in regard to anything. The shipwrecked come to the stable seeking not to possess, but to be possessed." I love that. Wanting not peace or religious high, but Jesus Christ. Brennan Manning in Lion and the Lamb. So here's the starkness of the manger scene. We have to see the rest of the Bible through this lens now. When God came to earth, he did not go to the temple in Jerusalem. He went to a small, shamed, and overlooked, prophetically charged bedroom community on the outskirts of Jerusalem. He did not come to bring honor and glory to the professional religious class or the political powers. He honored the disenfranchised, shepherds and women. He brought honor to a class of people excluded from the temple. He set up his Holy of Holies in a basement of a cave. He came as an infant, ultimately approachable, independent. He is not defiled by the hands of sinners holding him. This is your God. We must look at the rest of the book through this lens. Herod was right in one thing. The child was a massive threat. Here's Manning again. The shipwrecked at the stable are captivated by joy and wonder. They have found the treasure in the field of Bethlehem. The pearl of great price is wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Everything else is cheap, fake, painted fragments of glass. If all we are going for is placid decency, routine prayer, and well-behaved worship and comfortable compassion, then we have effectively parted company with the shipwrecked and have no fellow with the pearl finder. I wonder if we were to stop people at random in the street on December 24th and ask them what they want most for Christmas, how many would say, "I want to see Jesus." Close quote. And so in all its irony, my privilege in this season is to call all to come to the stable, to say, the King is here. He is receiving gifts and praise. He is receiving confession and proclaiming pardons. I do not proclaim it to holy people, people with their act together, the religious, the busy, the successful, the good. I proclaim the invitation to the outcasts of society, the shipwrecked, those who are, humanly speaking, seeking truth in Islam, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jehovah's Witness, New Age, science, and even Judaism. Behold, the King of the universe is waiting. He is a rescuer. He, in fact, is the rescuer. Here's Brennan Manning one more time. I come to the stable just as I am, not as I should be, since I'm never going to be as I should be, a poor, weak, sinful man with easy rationalizations for my inconsistent behavior, a little frightened because I am called to live out the words I am setting down on paper. The little child looks at me, smiles, and says, "Don't be afraid. I'm with you. I expect more failure from you than you expect from yourself. Peace is my gift to you. Live this day in the wisdom of accepted tenderness." Close quote. We must not miss the child who loves the unlovely, the unloved, and the unlovely this year. Just ask the Spirit to make it so. Yep, more next time. Merry Christmas. And by the way, a personal note, a new book in my teen biblical fantasy series, Kingdom Quest, is out. It's called Shadowbound. It's on Amazon and Kindle. It's book 5 in the series, but standalone as well. Not just a C.S. Lewis-esque gospel fantasy adventure with great characters. It's also an allegory of the biblical book of Job. So consider getting it, or any other of the books for the 10 to 16-year-olds in your life or church. Get them for your church's youth group and middle school group. They will appreciate that. Also, my book for struggling Christian couples, Before the Couch, is also available on Kindle and Amazon and Audible. Only $10 for the paperback. I think that we've been getting couples to ask the wrong questions. If that's curious to you and interesting to you, check out this book. Get one for couples you know that are struggling. And check out the great reviews on Amazon. Yep, Merry Christmas.